Ladies and gentlemen, we now have to transition to our panel discussion. We really have had a great morning, really challenged in so many ways. And now we just want to make sure that we can have a proper conversation among a group of scholars and experts. We are going to be now focusing on technology and critical minerals. Our keynote speaker has spoken to these issues, teasing out some few issues, so we want to delve deeper into them. Paving the way for value addition of critical minerals, assessing challenges, opportunities. And this panel is organized by Southern Africa Resource Watch, South Africa. And I'd like to invite the moderator, Dr. Claude Kabemba, who is the Executive Director of the Southern Africa Resource Watch, South Africa. And can I please ask that we have some chairs organized so that they can sit properly here. I don't think it's going to be possible with this arrangement. I think Prof. Wekesa went to look for chairs. We just need 5 chairs so that they can sit where everybody can see them and we can have a proper conversation. Now, whilst we're organizing chairs, can I just ask Dr. Claude Kabemba to come forward, followed by Professor Mahlanyane Kenneth Mkhulu Mate, who's the distinguished professor and the head of Institute for Catalysis and Energy Solutions at the University of South Africa, UNISA. Thank you so much. Let's put the chairs on this side, if you don't mind, so that we can all see them at once. Can Mr. Diprose Muchena, Director of Resources Futures, Open Society Foundation, South Africa, please come forward. Ms. Lauren Hermanus, Founding Director of Southern Transitions, South Africa, please. May I please invite you to come forward. Last but not least, Dr. Davi Malungisa, Senior Advisor, Natural Resources and Climate Change, Southern Africa Resource Watch. Dr. Claude, over to you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right.
How do we have a microphone? We have a roll. Yeah.
There's a second one that I put on that side.
Good morning. I think we are all set for this session that the Southern Africa Resource Watch is organizing. For those who do not know, the Southern Africa Resource Watch, we are a think tank / civil society organization that invests in the governance of natural resources across the continent, with our headquarters based here in Johannesburg. So we have a very diverse panel, really following the keynote from Brian, which really touched on many, many issues in a very eloquent way. The theme of this panel is technology, AI, and critical minerals, paving the way for value addition, assessing challenges and opportunities. We just come from a G20 summit, which really adopted a framework on critical minerals that suggests that we need to ensure that the African continent is able to add value locally to its critical minerals that it's able to unite around how to proceed in adding value. And the request really from the G20 was that there is that possibility for the international community to support that call. And that was an important outcome, I think, from the G20, that it's possible to support Africa to build technology capacity to process its minerals on the continent and to build resilient value chains. So to really discuss on these issues, to really discuss these issues, we have put together a panel for very distinguished colleagues. We have Lauren Emanas on the far left. She's the co-founder and co-director of the Southern Transition. It's a think tank. She will help us answer the critical question: what practical progress is emerging around the issue of value addition on the continent? She will be followed by Professor Kenneth Mkulu Mate. He's a distinguished professor and the head of Institute for Catalysis and Energy Solution, University of South Africa. He will address the heart of Africa's technological challenges, and he will be followed by Mr. Depros Muchena, who is just on the right side of Lauren, who is the Director of Resource Futures at the Open Society Foundation, will speak to the practical financing challenges and opportunities in this in the area of value addition. And then we have Mr. Devi Malungisa, who is a senior advisor climate change energy transition at the Southern Africa Resource Watch. Lauren, just to start with you, the Southern Transition, you produce very great research around these issues of value addition, technological advancements, and really around the issues of critical minerals. And you go across the continent trying to understand what is happening. Can you really tell us what practical progress is emerging on the continent? Where are we seeing actual movement on value addition, upgrading across the continent? What hubs are happening on the continent?
Yeah, good morning. Thank you, Claude. Good morning, everyone. I think I just want to start by saying I can agree with all the speakers who've gone before. And, you know, this is a conversation that it's not just this morning. It's great to be part of a wave of new thinkers and doers across private, public, civil society spaces who I think are thinking with a new kind of energy and vigor around the question of the continent's natural resource wealth, not only minerals, but certainly minerals are critical for us. And yeah, I mean, that word has a lot of weight to it. So I think I want to start by just emphasizing what has already been brought up by Brian this morning, which is the question of agency. You know, the story of our minerals as a continent, it's often told in these kind of very broad strokes and broad brushes. And it's difficult to get from that very high-level story and a story of vague potential down to actual progress. Because those two levels of discourse are incredibly disconnected. And agency doesn't appear at that high level of generalizations. It actually, you have to go down to the ground. And that doesn't mean that you ignore global systems. Actually, global systems operate at the very local level. And you know that, Claude, from the work that you do, very local scale work that you do with communities that live close to mines on the continent. So I think, you know, the one thing maybe to start with here is that governance is really key. And I don't mean the words written down and the rules written down at the domestic level or at the international level, for example, with the UN panel on critical minerals, with these kind of lofty statements of ambition, but really going back to a kind of understanding of governance as the real rules of the game. So if we look at the real rules of the game, these are not set up for Africa to thrive and to win. And it's really important that we engage these real rules if we are to reverse the trajectory and to actually make sure that value is generated domestically, is captured domestically, but also that value is protected domestically. So the conversation around sort of industrialization of the back of minerals and the conversation around sort of the human rights and respecting human rights and preserving ecological integrity, these are often very different conversations, and one is played up against the other, right? So the idea is if we want to develop and develop quickly, then we have to run roughshod over human rights and ecological rights. We don't have time to observe them. And then on the contrary, you know, if we want to respect human rights, if we want to respect ecological integrity and make sure that we preserve our ecosystems on which we depend, then this is, again, sort of set up as there's a kind of a weird false dichotomy between the two. And so I think, you know, it's really for us to come back to, well, that's the story at an international level. But how do we want to determine our path on the ground, you know? And so if I look at some of the examples of where these kind of high-level international stories about the continent and its minerals are actually being interrupted, there are two cases that I'd like to put forward, and they really resonate with the speakers that have already gone before me. So the first case is the case of Guinea. Now, Guinea is a small country in West Africa, but Guinea has got the largest reserve and the highest quality bauxite in the world, almost a quarter of the world's bauxite. It's got the largest unexploited reserve of iron ores as well, iron ore in the world. It's a population of 12 million people, and with access to the sea, with 4 countries bordering it. I mean, you would really think that this is a country that is primed for wealth creation, wealth generation, you know, a country whose development would be easy to facilitate. If we look at what's happened from Guinea's independence, first independence on the continent until now, you see uninterrupted patterns of extraction, right, and extractivism. So if you go to where the bauxite is mined in Guinea, it's sort of up on an elevated part of the land, not so far from the capital. It takes you 4 to 8 hours to get there on a road that is mostly pothole, okay? Then when you get there and you stand on this rich bauxite, and I mean, it's not like our gold, which is kilometers underground. You just reach down and the bauxite is in your hands, okay? So when you look down, you see 3 railways. Each railway is privately owned by a mining company, each one from a different country. And each railway goes down to a port that's privately owned. And no Guinean good or person travels on those railways or uses that port infrastructure, right? So it's like enclave development in the extreme. Now, I'm coming to the good news. So in 2021, there was a coup in Guinea. And this coup replaced the first democratically elected president in Guinea, although he had somewhat rejigged the system to stay on. And what was very interesting is that in the immediate aftermath of this coup, there was a huge outcry from the international community, including China, which was really unusual at the time because China tends to be sort of politically agnostic when it comes to its economic partners on the continent, right? But after some time, when it was very clear that this coup wasn't going anywhere, and the transition government and governance that was set up afterwards wasn't going to be easily moved by this kind of international outcry, and that the world nonetheless needed Guinea's bauxite and its iron, but more immediately its bauxite, it was very interesting that the leader of the country and the interim government that came into power seized its market power in order to force requirements for industrial investment attached to mines, which had already been in Guinea's laws for some time. For a whole decade, there had been legislated requirements for royalties to be paid over from the mines, so for public revenues to be generated, and for industrial investment. And it really took there a challenge.
We'll come back.
Yeah.
But I think you've made an important point.
Yeah.
That here we are seeing extractivism continuing.
Well, I would say that the extractivism is being interrupted, but only by challenging what is the accepted rules of the game. And it's not always convenient how that challenge takes place. But this, what was kind of seen immediately as a problem, and I'm not advocating for coups all across the country, but it's just a very interesting power play that has really changed possibility.
Keep that thought there.
Yeah.
I think we'll come back because I'm interested on the fact that bauxite continues to go out raw. And my question to you, Professor, really is how do we capture? Because in Guinea, the leadership has said we need to add value to our minerals in the country, but value is not being added. Brian spoke about the type of student we are producing. I want to hear from you. Can Africa realistically catch up with the rest of the world in terms of skills, technology, so that we capture? What do we need for us to capture the bauxite, to keep it in country, transform it, and expand the resource base where we can diversify our economies?
Thanks, Claude, for the question, and thanks the organizers for the invitation. And I'll echo what Lauren said when she started that the groundwork has been brilliant from the previous speakers who preceded us. And I'm going to start with 3 statements. Start with the one from my co-panelist here on the left. He is quoted as saying, the continent needs to negotiate as a bloc to leverage its mineral bargaining power. Then from Maxwell Gomera of UNDP, he said we have to think this way. Selling raw cobalt is like exporting flour when you could be exporting bread. And then the last one is leaders need to give ordinary people more control over the continent's coveted critical minerals. So when we have to address a question that says, can Africa feasibly attain parity with the rest of the world? We would start by saying yes. And when one has to deviate from the script and go with what is known, number one, we have seen dilution of STEM education, which is necessary. we are not having ongoing conversations about skills of the future. And as such, from what Brian had said in terms of reskilling and retraining, those are the things that we need. But we also have to say, we should not wait for students to be at university for them to start to understand the potential career choices that they can have. So if we were to look at critical minerals, we would have to ask a simple question. Are we having enough geologists? Are we having enough mining engineers? Are we having a lot of industrial processing that should happen? We know that there are certain countries that have refused for the raw materials to leave their countries, insisting that they should be processed in the country. So we would then have to say, from G20 activities, where the critical minerals charter has been adopted, there has to be intentionality of processing happens in the country. We see Morocco making advances in terms of going to have a gigafactory, but when we look at cell manufacturing, we are always told that we don't have infrastructure, we don't have skilled people, but we are then encouraged to get into recycling. So it's a question of when we strengthen regional collaborations, we should then be able to be setting the agenda. And it has to be not limited to the 5-year cycles. We should have those long-term visions. I would say the simple thing that you have to think about, where Africa has a working infrastructure of rail, where we have energy access, we would then say we are championing and guiding our industrialization. And like we said, it should not be about receiving foreign aid for us to be able to progress this thing. I'll pause there.
Thank you, Prof. I think the issue of reskilling, of investing in science, in STEM, calls for finances that we need to find. I think when you look at what the continent is investing in education, it's just 2%. And that is a gap when we think at least 10% should go into education if we need to start catching up with the rest of the world. So we are really at the back foot. So I want to bring in Mr. Depros Muchena. You are from the Open Society Foundation. You are from, I want to ask you, how do you respond from a perspective of political economy? How do we mobilize capital? I hear we should not go with begging for finances. The continent is not poor, it's rich enough. There's a lot of tax evasion, but I want to know, how do we mobilize capital, both public and private, and philanthropic capital, to ensure that we resolve the issues that we need to do to ensure that we capture the big value in terms of value addition on the continent?
Thank you, Claude. First, before the financing question, I think Brian challenged us significantly today, this morning, about a range of things. But one of the things that we ought to do as Africans is to develop the intelligence to see money flows, where money is going and how money is moving. Because not knowing that is leaving us holding on to a critique either of our governments or of different actors in the value chains. That critique is not really landing on real issues. We were having this G20, and there's a lot of celebration these days about the G20. But while this G20 was happening, far away from here in Canada, there were two groups of institutions that were meeting. One was the Qatar Sovereign Wealth Fund, and the other was Ivano Mining, owned by Robert Friedland, the Canadian billionaire who is involved in mining. And they were entering into a memorandum of understanding. to allow the Qatar Investment Fund to get into the Ivano mining and acquire shares, 4% of the shares. That 4% of the shares was equally the equivalent of 500 million. That's a deal signed in Canada. But when you pierce the corporate veil, the motivation of that deal, you will see that Ivano Mining Group is in DRC. That is where it is mining in the copper and zinc sector. That's where it is active. And last week, while we were focusing on G20, doing keynote and so forth, the Sheikh of Qatar was meeting Felix Tshisekedi in DRC. And what has actually happened is that this Canadian company has elbowed out a South African mining company from DRC, and we're now going to be seeing Qataris investment. Sovereign Wealth Fund from Qatar goes through Canada, but its destination is the DRC. Brian mentioned the role of sovereign wealth funds as catalytic in mobilizing resources for us, which I want to underscore. We have not touched these things called sovereign wealth funds, and they are moving around freely. We are not capturing the value to invest in financing for value addition. But we are also not following money flow significantly, that when things are happening, we then allow a deal to pass, but it is not really about value addition. It is about extraction. So more and more money is coming into Africa to facilitate primitive accumulation and extraction. And through governance and regulation, it is possible for African agents to be restored in order to enable that money to say, yes, you can come in, only if 90% of it is going into value addition. This is what the Indonesians did with nickel, that we will not allow nickel to leave these shores unless there is value addition to it. So any financing that comes in here for you to make money from mining nickel should be in the processing sector, so that when we export, we're not exporting rock, we're exporting value. That is just one point. The second is there is a role for philanthropy. There is a lot of conversation about risk in Africa. And I don't really buy this risk argument that, it's risky to do business here. Because if it was risky to do business, the example I've given you of DRC would not suffice. In DRC today, there are 100 armed groups operating in the eastern part of DRC. And yet capital at the level of 500 million is flying in and out every day. And then we look for small countries to give examples that we can't invest until you do these reforms. Capital is not that timid. When it needs to extract, it goes in exactly like the Guinea example that we've been given. We've got an example like that in Buera, where the helicopter just lands, picks things and leave. So regulation and what Lawrence called governance is something that I really, really believe we need to fix to attract investment, because we can have all these poor pro-policies right. But if you don't have governance, or if you have faulty governance, that normally undermines and nullifies the impact for value addition. The final one is to put also financing in the context of the gap that we have. Brian spoke about 1.3 trillion to 1.9 trillion funding gap, which we need not just for value addition, but for climate financing and the development gaps that we require for our infrastructure developments. Unless we deal with this financing gap within the context of mopping out money that is located elsewhere in this world, we will forever be having a discussion here without tackling the larger political question. And this is why this is the reason why I raise this. If you look at 2024, most of the money from the world did not come into value addition for critical minerals development in Africa. It went into peace and security budgets. In 2024, the world spent 2.7 trillion just on peace and security budgets. We need 1.3 for development financing. And the leader in the spending was the US, followed by China, Russia, France, UK, and South Korea was the 10th. So if our money available for value addition and industrialization is going to fund wars and conflict, then we will continue to have this problem we have. We can't tackle this problem only locally without addressing the global political economy of money flows. And this is my concern at this present moment. We can do everything we do, but without reforming the global security financial architecture where money is flowing to places where primitive accumulation is possible, we will forever be struggling. And our governments here will need to strengthen regulation of money coming in and regulation of money coming out. Because not only is the 100 billion of tax, illicit flows going out, there's also money just from the mining sector of around 20 to 40 billion that we lose through things such as tax holidays, as well as just illicit transfer pricing, misinvoicing, and so on. So you asked the question of political economy, and I raise it, that we really need to think about engaging globally, but acting locally.
Depros, thank you very much. Devi, I think we have a challenge here. When we extract minerals, the final, what we want to see in the final analysis is the improvement in the lives of people. I think it's not about how much we extract, it's that is changing people's lives. And you with the Southern Africa Resource Watch, we are known for proximity, working with communities. So having listened to all these challenges, from really difficult to add value, from universities' challenges to upgrade the system to produce skilled students that can define the future of value addition, with challenging finances. How do you expect change in the lives of communities? And what is the impact we are seeing of extraction on society and environment from the work that you are doing?
Thank you. I think mine is almost an emotional space where if you are looking at the impacts, I cannot even define them. So what I've done is I'll also show some pictures so that we can see what are those impacts. But in the context of G20, if you're just looking at the leadership declaration, you'll see that it's headlined as promoting solidarity. And that word, I think, is being taken for granted if we are looking at what is the real meaning of solidarity. But first things first, what we have, especially in the critical mineral space, is that we have got a demand-driven model. That many developments in the energy transition, in the AI sector, the fourth industrial revolution, you can see that there is a heightened demand for green technologies if we're looking at energy transition. Those are your solar panels, your battery systems for electric vehicles, and so forth. So that demand means there is an opportunity. The opportunity to industrialize, but also the opportunity to supply, just to supply minerals. So if then you are looking at a given demand, what you have to look at are the supply side factors. And that's where I think in Africa, we are facing quite a lot of supply side constraints, which I think they also include capital, access to infrastructure, to avoid what is called pit to port, where we just take and we transport raw materials. So when I was just looking at the declaration, remember we've seen many, or heard many declarations. The Millennium Declaration, the poverty reduction strategy papers, a lot of plans have been placed for Africa's development. So we don't need really to celebrate much unless there is real change in the lives of people. So if you go to section 31 of the declaration, the leaders' declaration, they speak of lack of technology. Then, by the way, they then say as well as socio-economic and environmental issues. They go on to, in section 32, to say we must have local beneficiation. And they say that beneficiation has to take place at source. But my point then goes to where they are saying there must be local community participation in section 32. But what is key for me now is to look at section 33 of that declaration, which says there must be robust ESGs. So the language of environmental or social governance is coming not to promote the livelihoods of people, if you see it. It's coming as part of ESG investing. And ESG investing will characterize communities as a risk factor when you are talking of capital. So in project finance, it means they are concerned that if you don't have participation, then you don't get a social license to operate. So if you don't have a social license to operate, there's a risk that there's going to be strikes. People are going to disrupt projects. So from an investor, then it becomes important to talk the language of ESGs. But from where we are operating, we have pictures that we can see that the value chain will start with this girl child, who instead of participating in the future economy, getting the skills that we are talking about, they are disrupted immediately. And you know, for a girl child, then you can start speaking of marginalization and multiple forms of discrimination starting at this point. And that's all against what SDG 5 on gender inequality and others will be speaking about. Then here you can also see around that even that child, the breastfeeding that's taking place there, this is a cobalt area. So you can see that labor participation is actually forced because of certain conditions around poverty and so forth. So these are, even for the boy child, they are also going to be in right at the bottom of the value chain. And all these people you can see are just in it's not even a sweatshop. This is like a concentration camp or whatever description, but you can't say this is humanity. So, Claude, I think the key point that I'm making is that we are facing very outrageous circumstances. These are the people that are feeding into the value chain that you end up with an EV battery and with a Tesla, for example. And you can't connect and say, G20 is saying solidarity. I don't think our value chains have got that human element, but they are also cruel to the Agenda 2030, which says we must have intergenerational, agreement so that we hand this earth to the next generation in a very compact way. So it's quite an emotional space, and we've had tribunals, where women have confessed to, cracked houses due to blasting. Some are also experiencing, rape cases, and you cry if you listen to say, no, this is a value chain. So my challenge then will be, is it worth it even to say we are providing feedstock? Or sometimes maybe we can leave our land as beautiful as it is and keep the minerals in the ground.
No, thank you so much, David. That's really emotional. Look, I've got a set of questions I wanted to follow up with the panelists, but I think we need your voice. So I'm going to open up for questions. Really, we've got, I think, if I'm not mistaken, something like 25 minutes, or 20 for questions and comments. Identify yourself, say who you are, where you come from. and then ask your question, brief question or comment. Thank you. 20 minutes. 20. So please, yes, go ahead, Ashraf.
Thank you, esteemed panelists and colleagues. Ashraf from IGD. Moving beyond narratives, there's always the narrative of the resource curse, and this has been going on for decades. Of course, US, China, BRICS, and now I see with the Gulf partners that are encroaching into this critical mineral extraction. There seems to be a major gap in research and narratives, and very recently on the role of the European Union that are intensifying their activities in extraction. Yet on a global level, at the COP30, they claim to be the green continent, promoting green, just energy transitions globally on the one hand, but the contradiction in investments in the global south, especially Africa, leaves a lot to be desired. So just before the G20 summit, the EU Commission President signed with our own president the Critical Minerals Agreement, where there was no public participation, and not even at parliamentary level. And so these kind of deals that are signed in the elite forums like the G20 without civil society, without public participation, I think that's a major gap that we should address. The EU has also released the EU Critical Mineral Security Strategy. And if you look at the language and analyze and decode, it's about extraction. And then they've also moved into hydrogen. And so countries like Namibia, et cetera, becomes very attractive for them for investment. And then they're now even getting into their oil and gas explorations in Africa is the highest at this point in time. So everything that the EU promotes at COP, they're doing the opposite on the continent. And how do we begin to play this narrative? So moving beyond the US-China narrative, I think the EU is always getting away with it because they're very good at the PR or the greenwashing, but we need a critical eye on those investments.
Thank you, Ashraf. Just to add on what Ashraf is saying, we heard from Brian talking about unity, that we need to bring unity, but by this, we are seeing a lot of bilateral agreement being signed by the EU and the US or China with African countries. Can you respond to that as you take up that? We are taking a few questions and comments, then just note that, then we'll come back to you. We have a hand somewhere there on top there. Professor Kajagara, I see. Is that, yeah? Yeah, that's...
Can I go?
Oh, can you go there, then we'll pass there.
Okay.
Introduce yourself and...
Timothy De Priya, honor student here at Wits. Just a question for the professor over there. He was asked, how does Africa keep up with the development of, as a continent to against other countries as a whole? I just want to ask, would Burkina Faso be a good practical example of that, where President Traoré decided to not import certain goods, but rather manufacture them in the country, amongst other things? So that's the question. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a great question. Prof, the people who really need to be skilled are simply only those who have gone to school. We also have raw skills in our society. You find here and there people producing new type of technologies, raw technologies. Is it possible to enhance that in terms of what that question from the Burkina Faso side is coming from? Can we have Prof?
Yeah, thank you very much for the panel. My name is Gilbert Khadiagala from the Wits International Relations. I just wanted to ask Lauren to finish her story on bauxite in Guinea. I think we only got one side of it, and then you didn't have time to finish the entire story on governance on bauxite. Thank you.
Okay, Lauren, you've got a chance to finish. Can you have the last one on this round?
Enkosi kakhulu. Igama lami ndingubuntu Makedama, and I'm an African literature student here at the University of the Witwatersrand. So my question relates to the unity of Africans and the possibility of nationalizing minerals. Is it possible that we can nationalize minerals to avoid the conversations that have always been, in every generation we always talk about, do we have the skills to manufacture finished products? Do we have, but we're in a university providing science, providing technologies, we study everything, we network with different countries, and yet when it comes to Africa, we must always consider the question, do we have the skills? Now, how do we then nationalize and avoid the interference of, whiteness and their junior partners interfering with that program? Because as soon as you nationalize or talk about nationalization, there's a forum group that goes to United States and say, land is being dispossessed. They're trying to take away businesses, which will then lead to lack of international investors and so on. How to avoid this, which will then possibly end the fungibility of black bodies? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think we'll come for the second round. You keep thinking about your questions. Devi, we'll start with you. Do you have something you want to pick up on those questions? Really very short.
Yeah, the first one, which was, I think, implying why, how, geopolitically, how do we fare? My take is that we don't have collective bargaining mechanisms as producer countries compared to, for example, the OPEC. It's a cartel, so they can control demand and supply. They've got that leverage, but we don't have that, and that should be a key, actually, demand that African civil society and other sectors should push for, so that we have got that.
Just on that, how do you build that unity? Because how do you think that unity should be built?
Okay, what we are getting right now is at the level of rhetoric, I think we have an oversupply of that. If you are looking at what our governments are saying, they are pushing an agenda for value addition, even the way that the South African presidents put the minerals on the agenda and put that as well. I think that's the beginning, and the push is actually for society, not only government. So we need a whole of society approach to push.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Lauren?
I just want to start by saying there's no such thing as a resource curse. Our resources are not cursed. This is an insane idea. And it's actually an idea that obfuscates the agency of different actors who are very deliberately pursuing strategies where there are very intended consequences that we know, at the level of communities, at the level of ecosystems, and at the level of these patterns of extraction and the design of infrastructure to support that extractivism, right? So I think we need to actively resist those narratives and put forward narratives that are grounded in reality, and not these kind of ghost stories and which really make us quite powerless. So, and sort of connected to that is the story about risk that you mentioned. This is so important that we speak into the conversation about risk in Africa as a risky country. It's completely true that they will put together a private militia when they want to get something out of the ground. The risk is just, and a risk is not an ontological fact, people. A risk is a social fact. It only exists in our minds, and it's a risk to an actor to achieve something. So to which actor and to achieve what, right? So, and a lot of it is just pure nonsense. The cost of capital in Africa, if you look at what was mentioned about the default rates on infrastructure projects in Africa, and you compare that to the rest of the world, really, there's a desperate need here for us to engage in the realm of ideas. And I agree with you, there's an oversupply of nonsense rhetoric and sort of warm feelings. but there's an undersupply of ideas that are put into practice. So the ideas that are really taken forward through interventions, that really counter this kind of insanity that we're meant to sort of internalize as Africa and the stories about us, But I mean, I will offer a separate conversation on Guinea for anyone who wants it, because it's a long story.
Can you just give the positive side, the quick
I
one?
will give the positive side.
Very quickly.
So obviously everyone was like, oh my God, a coup, but people only care about Africa's democracy if it interrupts their project of extractivism, and then tend to be kind of okay with any form of politics as long as it's business as usual, But it hasn't been business as usual with the new government in Guinea. And one of the first things that they've done, and I think this is also, we must be careful about focusing only on what can be done in the future. I think it's very important that we imagine the future. I think that is very important. I think that imagination is shut down. But there's a lot that can happen now, immediately. And one of those very important things is to look at our fiscal systems and to look at trade. And I think the underpricing of resources, it cannot be overstated, the extent to which this is undermining our development in Africa. And again, not a resource curse. It's being done by people. It's being done by actors, right? It's being done by this investment that we're so hungry to attract to the continent. And so that's the first thing that they've done. There's a big project overhaul of the fiscal system and closing of tax holes in Guinea. So if you look at the share of mining as a percentage of the GDP, as a percentage of the activity, like the real economic activity, versus the actual revenues that it brings into the country, it's only 16% of public revenues, and it should be most of it, actually, because there's already requirements for public ownership, so for national ownership of the minerals in Guinea. So for shareholding by the government, there's a requirement for royalties to be paid. There's a requirement for a number of different taxes, and those taxes aren't paid. So that's number one that's happening. Number two that's happening is they kicked out investors who were not making good on their legal obligations. So this is also, governance is not what's written down in paper. If you don't enforce rules, they don't exist, okay? So what the government did was they said, okay, many of you have within your mining covenants this requirement to invest in infrastructure, this requirement to invest in industrialization, to procure locally. All those things exist, right? They all exist. They're fine. So there was a period of where the government was just ignored. The mining companies just carried on like normal, because this is what companies are used to doing when African governments make demands, that they don't really think that those demands are going to be enforced, right? So it's a kind of absurdist performance on all sides. So they actually kicked out the UAE-based aluminium company, which had promised in excess of 2 decades ago to invest in alumina refining production.
Thank you.
So this was like this is really big.
Thank you, Lauren.
Yeah.
I think the gap between policy and implementation here and enforcing laws is an important one. I think the case, Lauren, you are pushing here, where government kicked out bad investors, is it's quite impressive.
And it's made new investors invest. So there's plans now for a big refinery.
Thank you so much. So, Prof, can you pick up some of the questions that were asked?
Thanks, Claude. I'm going to start by referring to Indonesia, where they said their development was anchored on first securing energy independence and abundance of energy, so that they can then work on industries. So going to Ashraf, and maybe to all of us, when the South African president, President Ramaphosa, signs with EU a critical minerals agreement, there is silence from AU and an understanding that South Africa is not home for all these critical minerals. You go to Mozambique, there's graphite. You go to Zim, there's lithium. And you'll find that other countries have started plans to do processing, but more importantly, to match their development with skilling of people, like the Harare Institute of Technology working on batteries. And when we are looking at DRC Zambia corridor of special economic zones, it's joint development of skills. But we have to say, how do we move from bilaterals to regional partnerships for growth? And I think the EU this year said to us clearly, they said African countries need their own critical mineral strategies that are aligned with their own developmental needs. They can come as a bloc, but they lament absence from African countries having their own critical mineral strategies. And that would go to the hydrogen export. Hydrogen has a false promise that a country like South Africa with water scarcity would be emboldened to say, we will make hydrogen for export so that we attract DFI. But you then have to say, as you are ensuring that other people have energy and therefore economic development, yourselves do not have such. So how then do you balance those things? To Mr. Dupree, Burkina Faso example. Lauren warned against being pro-coups and all. We have to say, where good things are happening, they are worthy of being emulated as long as we are not going to trample on the rights of indigenous people and the sovereignty of countries. We should not have a temptation that would say we are going to nationalize Tumtunzi and find out a country is ostracized, underdeveloped, and subjected to incessant, perpetual wars, and the country is not developing. So, for us as Africa, when we understand the importance of ensuring that the infrastructure deficits are addressed, then we gain our independence. Because we would be able to say, we do have the transportation to ferry the goods, we do have the energy, but we proudly are protecting our waters that are leading to food sustainability. Because it's going to be a problem that you are having all these developments, but then you find that your water and your arable land are no longer able to produce food. And we know that punitively people can give tariffs that would make it impossible for people to live on aid into perpetuity. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Depros.
Yeah, again to Ashraf, who raised the question of narratives. I think we need to really think about investing very strongly in an African narrative about resources, development, growth, and so forth. Because that is vital to liberate ourselves from thinking in a colonial cycle that thinks when you have resources, you must develop the enclave and super develop the enclave so that you have these islands of effectiveness in a sea of chaos. So the narrative work starts from even the data we use. You know, so often we recite this figure that Africa is 30% of deposits of critical minerals. Who said that? Where did they find that from? When was that survey done? You know, when you check further, these are sources like International Energy Agency, Harvard Atlas Economic Complexity, you know, US Geological Survey. When did you see them in Magaliesberg moving around in villages, searching and confirming that we have lithium only in 30% availability to us? So we start to work with the mindset of 30%, the mindset of scarcity. So you are engineered to think in scarcity terms, only in 30% terms. even probably when you have 70%. So we really need to think about decolonizing data sources and building data sovereignty in order for us to start to build an independent thought process in the value chain production. That's an important part of the narrative. The second is to resist this temptation of exceptionalism. When the European Union comes to Lesotho, because there's been some discovery and politicians begin to rub their hands, anticipating the revenue inflows to come from a mine that has not been established. A mine takes between 5 to 25 years to be really, really productive. So we start negotiating with the European Union in that meeting. The European Union is bringing the European Union with 12 revenue economists, 15 contract lawyers, and geological survey specialists, and so forth. And we're waiting with members of the Central Committee to discuss a deal on minerals. You see the return on investment from that conversation. So we have to resist the urge of acting independently when the countries we are working with are acting in a joint form. This is why the global gateway of the European Union is about. It is about negotiating to consolidate what the critical minerals raw material initiative already established. They discovered that's not enough. Let's have the global gateway, but it's actually about responding to the Chinese investments in Africa and the world. So if we don't do narrative investment, supporting, rethinking, and unthinking of the way we approach development, then we're going to be sitting ducks, taken over and used as junior partners of international financial capital and its initiatives. So that would be my response broadly to that. The last one is to come back, I think, to Devi Malungisa. Devi has spoken very passionately about what's happening in communities which host minerals. We really need to think very seriously about the role of law as a potential for beginning to litigate for interest of communities to be protected. There is quite a bit of intimidation that goes on in companies that are mining in these communities. And our inability to even use existing laws, rules and regulations to enforce the rights of communities and villagers. There is a bit of lawmaking, strategic public interest litigation, massive political education about resources we have on the ground, because I think we must use them, Devi. You want to keep them in the ground, but we must use them until, okay. I think we must use them, but must use them in such a way that we do the homework to make sure that there is beneficiation as soon as the crop comes out, as soon as the rock comes out. Otherwise, we're exporting value and getting in return absolutely nothing. Thank you.
No, I think this was an excellent panel. Due to limit time that we have to close. I think we need to applaud our panelists. I think what this panel has shown is that this continent has got potential, but we need to take responsibility. We need to control on, but there is an indictment on universities. I think professors here, there's been a call really throughout the speaker, toward the panelists, that we need to produce our own data that we use to provide solution to our problems. It seems the data we are using are incorrect, the data we are using are foreign, but we need to have our own. So that's why I think a call for activist university that go in the field to collect data becomes critical. On those words, I want to thank you for the great panel that you offered us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doc. I'm so sorry to be doing this. I'm just doing my job. They pay me a lot of money to do this. So, can I ask the speakers from the morning to just take a picture right there? The speaker, maybe the guest speaker can join the speaker. Prof, come forward so that they could take a picture over here. Whilst they are doing that with the photographer come, we're also going to take a group picture. I don't know whether this is the right place or outside, but outside. Okay. Colleagues, we're going to take a tea break. Yeah. We're going to take a tea break straight after this, and then please come back in 10 minutes' time. Thank you so much. Yeah.